ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a very special episode of Making an Impact with Zebu Nation. Today, we have for you the MLS Draft Spectacular for the 2022 MLS season. That's right. So we're a little bit farther in the future than what you might be if you started your own series, but this Draft Spectacular will work for any season that you start up with Major League Soccer. Obviously, depending on what date you start. If you start in February, sort of the basic date that most saves start at, then you're going to miss most of the draft. So you might want to start in early January if possible, and that might get you access to at least one of the earlier drafts that we're going to look at here. So first of all, what you got to know is that every season in Major League Soccer, there are 4 drafts. Now, you might not know that. When you hear about Major League Soccer, you just hear about the draft. It has a draft. Well, it's not necessarily true. It actually has 4, sometimes even 5 drafts. Now, that 5th draft comes in seasons when you have an expansion team. For example, like LAFC came in last year, so there was an expansion draft for LAFC last year. That means that that expansion team gets to pick 5 players from any other team in the league, and they can just snatch 5 players. Well, there are rules, and you can protect players and all kinds of stuff, but we're not going to talk about that because that draft just comes around every once in a while. It's not something you see every year. But what you do see every year are 4 separate drafts. And you might be asking yourself, well, where the heck in this game can I find information on these drafts? It's a good question. Where you go is competitions, Major League Soccer, and then you can see the rules. And way down here, way low at the bottom, you can see draft dates. So first of all, you have the Superdraft. Starts in January. This is January 13th this year. It changes. I think it's like the second Friday of every January for whatever reason. But anyway, this year it's the 13th. And what the Superdraft is, this is the draft for all of the college players and NCAA university players who have made themselves eligible for Major League Soccer. So there's a big draft every year. It's basically the best under 23 players in the nation, including Canada, that come to Major League Soccer every year. So it's a very important draft. If you want to build your team with youth, you can look at the Super Draft. Now, next up is the March Waiver Draft. The March Waiver Draft is very important because it comes right after the roster deadline. So on March 2nd, there's a deadline in MLS saying that, well, I guess it's not March. I guess it's like February 28th. Anyway, it's a couple days before the waiver draft. There is a roster cutoff date where you have to solidify your roster and say, this is a snapshot of my roster. You have to get your roster legal with all of these salary cap rules up here. So you got to familiarize yourself with the salary cap rules. Hopefully you do that beforehand. But anyway, once you get your roster settled, you might have to cut some players. You might have to waive some players. And those players will go into the waiver draft for other teams in the league to select and pick up their contracts. That's how the waiver draft works. Then you have a December waiver draft, which is the same thing except at the end of the season. So players at the end of the season who they have been waived at the end of the season or at some point during the last roster cutoff. Those players who've been waived. There's a draft right after the MLS Cup ends. So basically like 2 or 3 days after the end of the season, there's this waiver draft to, again, pick up players who have been cut from their teams. And then finally, a few days later, there's the re-entry draft. And this takes place over 2 stages. So it takes place, about 3 days, a week, a weekend, somewhere along there. There's this 2-stage draft. And these are players whose contracts have run out at the end of the season. So the important thing to note with the waiver drafts, both of them, and with the re-entry draft, you're picking up these players' contracts as is. That's something that a lot of people don't understand. They draft somebody, and then a week later that person is gone from their roster, and they don't understand why. Well, the reason is because you picked them up with like 6 days remaining in their contracts. So now they're gone. Now they're out of contract. So after you sign somebody from one of these drafts, you have to go and look at their contract and see if this is something you want and something you can afford, honestly. And you have to re-sign them to a new contract, or just let them play out their old contract for as long as you want. Like, for example, say you draft somebody in the re-entry draft. Maybe you didn't scout them so well. You picked them up and you look, and you say, oh, they're not really as good as I thought they were going to be, or I don't need them, or their contract is too expensive, or whatever. But then you can look and say, well, their contract actually runs out on December 31st. So I don't have to do anything. I'll just let their contract run out. So it's a way to just pick up a guy, look at him, bring him into camp, and say, well, I didn't actually want him, and you can just let his contract run out. On the other hand, if you do want him, you can re-sign him to a new contract, and sometimes they don't want to re-sign with you. That's sort of the perils you take when signing somebody from one of these drafts. But for the most part, they have to honor their contract. Same thing with these waiver drafts. Usually with the waiver drafts, they'll have, especially the March waiver draft, they'll have at least a season worth of contract left with them. So you can pick them up for the season or however long their contract lasts, but it's just important to note that when you draft somebody, they come with a contract already, because if you haven't already seen some of my previous videos and you don't know this, when players sign a contract in MLS, they sign a contract with the league, not with the teams. They sign contracts with the league as a whole, and then teams are allowed to acquire the rights to those contracts via things like this Superdraft and the waiver draft and all these multiple drafts. So there you go. There's the setup. Now, some other information you can look at on this Major League Soccer screen is under transfers. You can look, and there's the draft. You can see the upcoming draft and the schedule for the draft, your draft information over here on the right, how many picks you have in the draft. You can see we have got 3 first-round picks here, you know, players that we've scouted here, things like that. And you can look at the players in the draft, and most importantly, you can look at the draft order. So 1 through 12, at least you can look at the first 12 picks anyway. Then, other stuff that's interesting down here, you can look at allocation rankings. So this is something you might not know about. There's an order to things. So this is sort of like the draft order. It's not exactly the draft order because this is the allocation order. But if a player gets waived in the middle of the season and there's no draft in sight, that person just goes on waivers. And you can claim him off of waivers that very week. The week he's cut, you don't have to wait for the draft at the end of the season. You can try to pick him up in season. You just have to be the first one to pick him up on waivers and be the highest on this list. So let's say, you know, if we're Montreal here at the bottom, which we are, and we pick somebody up on waivers, it has to mean that nobody else in the league wants him. If nobody else in the league picks him up on waivers, then we get him. But if we pick him up and somebody else picks him up, they get him, whoever they might be, because they're higher ranked here on this list. The allocation ranking. Let's see. And if you want to see which players are available, you can look here in the waiver list. There's currently no players available because we got drafts and stuff coming up, so they're all in the waiver drafts. None of them are available just out there to pick up. Something else interesting to look at here, estimated trade values. If you've ever wondered what a draft pick is worth, how about this? Look at what they're worth. The first round draft pick in the 2022 Superdraft is worth between $650,000 and $1.2 million. So you can get some decent value for a first round pick this year. Now that value goes down the farther away you get in years. So 3 years from now, that draft pick is only worth, $487,000 to $900,000, but you can still get pretty good value for a lot of these draft picks. Even a 4th round pick is worth some money, $75,000 to $150,000. That's not a lot, but you can get some general allocation money for that. You can use that money to do different things, bring in other players. You know, a lot of people don't really like super draft picks. They don't want to build their team with youth. They would just rather have the cash, and this is a way to do that. And this is a way to actually estimate some value, which I know a lot of people come into Major League Soccer and they got no idea. So here you go. Transfers, estimated trade values. It's under the Major League Soccer purview. There you go. That's how you get there. All right, so what we're going to look at today, we're going to start by looking at something that you might not know a lot about. It's the Combine. And what is the Combine? The Combine is, it's basically where all the players go who are entering into the Superdraft, which means these are all the college players. And they go there and they work out for scouts and for general managers and for coaches. And then they play some games. So you can go and scout those games. Let me see. We scouted a game earlier this week. Here it is. Here's the scouting combine. So there's 4 teams. And they each play each other 2 or 3 times. And you can go and you can scout those games. And hopefully you send your scouts there. But you can also scout the games individually here with this little drop down. Now, I attended this match up here, which was X versus Chaos. And you can click on the rosters, and you can see all the guys. Now, it's not every player in the draft, but it's a lot of players in the draft come to this combine. So you can, as you can see, the Team X right now, we've got them about 60 to 70% scouted, and so far this team isn't looking so good. And we can go down to Team Ace. I like to use this little down arrow here because it'll take me through all 4 teams. Team Ace looks a little better. They got a couple of higher quality prospects here. Para looking okay. He's got some potential anyway, but he's 22 years old. He's a little old. 14 dribbling and 14 pace. I mean, he's okay, but not really the type of guy. And we got them about 80% scouted. Team Chaos, this team is looking much better. They got some high-quality prospects here. Miguel Angel Barragan, 3-star player, 20 years old. This guy might be the best player in the draft as I'm looking at him right now. 16 pace, 16 acceleration, 14 finishing, teamwork, work rate, technique. Poacher, this guy, he's left-footed, if that helps. Temperamental, so maybe he's not that great. But physically, technically, he looks like he could be the best prospect in the draft for 3 reasons, really. High ability, 3 stars. You know, 3.5 stars is usually the absolute maximum you're ever going to see in the super draft. So 3 stars is really good. 3.5 star potential, all the way up to a dark star of, 5th dark star. So this guy's got a lot of potential. So those are 2 reasons. And then the third reason is he's 20 years old. Most players who enter the Super Draft are between 21 and 23 years old. So they're a little older. So anytime you get anybody in the Super Draft under 20 years old or under 21 years old, his stock is going to be raised a little bit because he's got that 1 or 2 extra years to develop. So there you go. That's a tip, another tip for you. Team Control. Again, not so good. Only 2-star prospects here. Charles Robinson, 21 years old. No youngsters on the squad. Not so good. Team X, we already looked at these guys. So, right now the teams aren't looking so good, but these aren't all the players. If you want to see all the players, you can go to Scouting, look at the players, and then you can do a search on Declared for upcoming MLS Super Draft right there. Let's clear that away as well. And there we go. So here's a list of all the players. Look at the abilities. So there we go. We got a few players who aren't in the Combine, but they're top prospects. So Peter Davis, a right back. Again, these guys who are 20, 21 years old. There's Miguel Angel. Andy Howe, central midfielder, 20 years old from the Mississippi Brilla. Looks okay. Pretty good. Work rate. He's got some nice mental, some nice physicals. Jumping, reach, and fitness not so good, but that's, that's understandable. We can work with that. So there you go. If you want to scout all the players, this is where you do. And that's another thing you got to think about is scouting. What I like to do, what I've discovered in the last season or two, is I have to go to my assignments and clear the board, especially if you're looking at a ton of players. If you're looking at like 1 million players from Portugal or Brazil or whatever, clear the board. Because look at all these guys that we have to scout in the Superdraft. We've got dozens and dozens, at least 150 guys to scout in the Superdraft. So you got to pull all your scouts back in from all around the world and send them to the Superdraft just so you can see all of the players. Now, I put a lot of emphasis on the Superdraft. I love the Superdraft. A lot of players, a lot of people who like American sports, American sports, one of the biggest days of the year is like the NFL draft. Or, whatever sport you follow, Major League Baseball, NHL hockey, NBA basketball, they all have big days for their drafts, and MLS is no different. So if you're a fan of American sports, you're probably going to be a fan of the draft like I am, and you're going to want to understand a lot of these little nuances. So we can look at our own transfers here a little bit. And you can see we got some stuff in the hopper. We got a lot of interesting things going on. I don't know that I'm going to be able to afford all of these guys, but we're trying to make some moves with what we've got. But that's not what we're here to look at. We're here to look at draft allocations. As I mentioned before, we got 3 first-round picks. That's pretty good. Usually, when you start out MLS Draft, you get 1 pick in each round. There are 4 rounds. And each round you get worse and worse players, honestly. So by the 4th round, you're getting players who are going to be backups at best. Guys who might not even make your roster. You look at them and they just got no potential. They're not good. You just get rid of them a lot of times. So if you can trade away those later round picks, which I do quite often, then I think it's the best thing to do. But a lot of people like to scour the draft for gems, and you can find good players in later rounds. If your scouts are good, if you're dedicated, or if you're lucky, you can find some good players in the later rounds. Okay, we're back a little prematurely here, but I want to show you a couple of things. First of all, you'll get emails like this throughout the week of the Combine. And this is what's known as a mock draft, and this is basically people's predictions of how the draft is going to go. You can see here it's got first 23 draft picks. That's the first round. And this is from USA Today. So this is what the media thinks of the draft, who's going to go first. So they're predicting Kyle Briggs is going to go first to the Portland Timber. You can see here Kyle Briggs, 20-year-old central defender. He's pretty good. I mean, I wouldn't sneeze at this guy at all. 15 positioning. He's got all the physicals you would want. I mean, he's pretty good. He's definitely worthy of a first-round pick, but this is a guy who wasn't even necessarily on my radar because they say he's only got 3-star potential. So he may be a very good player right now, but this is probably just about as good as he's going to be. So if you needed a player to start, maybe Portland needs a central defender right now. So maybe that's why the media is predicting him to go first. But we'll see. We'll see. But anyway, this is a good way. It's just another little tidbit of a way to sort of figure out who to draft and what players are there. If your scouting isn't working for you, or if you didn't go to the Combine and you kind of forgot to scout the Combine or whatever, you can always look at these emails and just sort of get an idea of who the media thinks are the best players in the draft. And what's funny is that at the end of the draft, the media is going to give you a grade, which happens in real sports all the time. The media will break down the various drafts and say this team had a terrible draft, they get a D-, and this team had a great draft, they get an A+ or whatever. And you're going to get the same kind of grade. And I'm going to be honest with you, I never agree with the grade that I get from the media. The media always rates my drafts so low because I always draft on potential. sort of more than ability. So the media doesn't like that, I guess. Whatever. Okay, we're back. It is finally here. We've finished with the combine. We've scouted as much as we can possibly scout. And now we're at the day, the MLS Superdraft. You're going to get this little email. It's one of those unskippable emails. You have to go to this draft, so you can't just skip through it. All right, so let's go to the draft. We'll view the draft. And this is what the draft looks like when you first get here. Here we are. We're 9th pick. We got all these picks to go. Now this draft UI is not very good. This doesn't give you a ton of information right here. It gives you their age and their position and their name and whether you're scouting them or not. That's about it. So what I like to look at, either the scout transfer or the scout style. I usually bounce back and forth between these two, because scout transfer gives you their age and their star ability, which I like to. I know some people don't rate these stars, but I like to go by the stars. Just I'm used to it from other video games, so this makes sense to me. It also gives you the information here, gives you your scouting recommendations. So we got a lot of high recommendations for a lot of these guys. Again, Kyle Briggs, #1 on our list, that defender. You can also sort them by age. Scott O'Brien, the youngest player in the draft, only 18 years old, but also not very good. 1 star. He's a Generation Adidas player. I don't know about this guy. But yeah. And then the other one, the style. This one shows you a little bit more, shows you their position, their best role, best duty, that kind of stuff. So that can be a little bit helpful when you're picking between players and say, well, is this guy a better defender? Will he fit better with my system than the other guy? You can kind of look here. But for the most part, I stay on the scout transfer because it gives me most of the information that I need to make a pick. So there's a couple ways you can do this. If you're looking to make trades, then you should maybe go 1 pick at a time. Just sort of see the next pick. And you can see with the first overall pick, Portland selected Andy Howe. So Howe is out of there. Get out of here. Andy Howe. He's been picked. And you can see your picks again here with the draft information. Summary is who all has been picked. And if you go 1 pick at a time, then there's a chance that teams will send you trade offers. Maybe nobody's going to, but you're going to see players getting drafted. The other thing I like to do here is I like to add condition drafted equals no, and that gets the drafted players out of this list. So it sort of cleans up this list a little bit as each guy gets picked. Moving on, Columbus, Vancouver, NYC, and so on and so on. Portland. So now we're on the clock. We got no trade offers, so that's fine. Now who do we pick? Look who's there. Look who's available. Miguel Angel Barragan. Generation Adidas player, 20 years old, 3 stars. He's maybe not the most potential. Hector Valenzuela has the most potential. Another striker. Very fast. 16 pace, 17 acceleration. Very good physically. Teamwork. He looks pretty good too. He's also a Generation Adidas player. So this is a tough choice in my opinion. These guys are very, very similar. Let's see what we got here. Great speed, acceleration, ambitious. Always looking to win. We like ambitious players. Can play a couple of positions, 1-footed. Again, not a great locker room guy for us. Can we compare the two? There he is, yes. Boy, they are super similar. Look at that. Look at that. Let's take a look at the attributes. So, Valenzuela, a little better technically. A little better mentally. It's splitting hairs, though, for the most part. Off the ball, determination is similar. Miguel has that jumping reach on him. 13 versus 7. Hector doesn't really give us much in the air, though he does have the better heading. He's the smaller guy. They're both left-footed. This is splitting hairs right now. Who do we pick? My gut is actually telling me Valenzuela. And the reason for that is ambition. He's an ambitious individual. He also has more potential. But at 21 years old, we got to play this guy. So this means he's gonna have to play. It's gonna be difficult to find room up front. We're not gonna go 3 strikers. I mean, our other options here, we got Leonard, who's a winger. We could use some wingers. But I think we really need those strikers. Well, I like Michael Egan. He's got the speed that we like. Nothing else, really. He's nowhere near as well balanced as those other guys. 21 years old. This guy's a little bit more well balanced. Not quite as much pace. I think we're going to go with Valenzuela. It goes against a lot of my principles. I usually draft the younger player if all else is even. But I think Valenzuela is the better player, so we're going to draft him. So there you go. Those are the kind of tough decisions you can make at the top of the draft. All right, so enough of that nonsense. Let's skip to our next pick. So it's a little ways down the road, so we'll skip to our next pick. And there we go. So we've had a few more draft picks. Aaron Leonard is the most potential, huh? He's that winger we were looking at. He's going to need a little bit of work to move him forward to where we like to play, but that's okay. And then we've only got him 78% scouted, but he seems like a good locker room guy. He seems like he'll work well. He doesn't give us much in the way of aerial. He's got a lot of potential, though. Again, he's 21 years old. The other guys are the same. So let's pick Leonard. Draft him up. And then we will likewise skip to our next pick, which is 23rd, last in the first round. Egan is still there. Rodrigo Cervantes, 21 years old, attacking midfielder here in the draft. There we go. Third draft. Cervantes has been drafted. So there we go. Complete the draft. Skip to the end. That's right. So then we'll show you the finals. All right, we got all of these. We don't need any of those. They offered us a lot of different things for those draft picks. So here we go. Contract time. Sorry about that. I had to hit the cough button there for a second. So this is Leonard. He's willing to take a backup contract. But I don't know if I like this. This would be a hot prospect. It means we'd only get him for 2 years. And, he would have a backup contract, which we can only have 6 of those. Well, I guess if I give him a backup contract and not a hot prospect contract, I can have a little bit of flexibility there. So we'll do that. All right. Negotiate contract. Senior minimum salary, $70K. All right. That's fine. Vancouver Whitecaps want the rights to Leonard and Valenzuela. Oh, okay. Get out of here. Get out of here. Get out of here. Offer a pick to Cervantes. Same deal. Backup contract. Negotiate. Senior minimum salary. All right. That's fine. The other player was a Generation Adidas player. So he's just got, I think a $150,000 contract. Something like that. Double what these guys got. and it's for 3 years. So we're going to have him for a while, so that's good. So there's the Superdraft. I hope you liked it. I hope you got some insight. Here's our draft grades. Where are we at? There's Toronto, #1 with an A+. Lots of A+s here. Montreal, we got an A+. That's the first A+ I've ever gotten. I'm going to be honest with you. Usually I get like D's and maybe a C or a B- if I'm extremely lucky. But this year we got an A+, 3 first-round draft picks, 3 players with pretty good, not just pretty good potential, but pretty good ability right now. So everybody's looking pretty good. Valenzuela, first team and still couldn't improve. Fan reaction, apparently nobody reacts to the Superdraft for whatever reason. But anyway, there you go. There's the draft. Oh, there was one other thing we had to look at real quick. In the December waiver draft, we picked up Sana Dabo, 20-year-old midfielder. Signed him to a new contract because his contract ran out at the end of that, with like a week remaining. We drafted him. Got him in. He's pretty good. I mean, physically he's not great. But he's got 14 vision, 15 passing, 15 first touch. Another little playmaker in the midfield just in case we needed him. So we got a lot of depth now, a lot of youth and depth in the midfield. After this draft, after picking up Dabo on the December waiver draft. So it's, again, restocking your team with draft picks can be pretty helpful in Major League Soccer. So there you go. We're going to end the episode there. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll come back with the preseason spectacular after this. So until then, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.